Let's bring it back home now. In Australia's economy, it's pretty obvious to anybody, is in a funk right now. It'd be close to or in recession if it weren't for government spending. The problem is that public investment now is at a record rate, according to the Bureau of Statistics today. It's holding inflation higher for longer, which is forcing the Reserve Bank to also keep interest rates higher for longer. But after the GDP came in for the September quarter at just 0.3%, the annual rate of 0.8%, also much weaker than forecast, money markets, as Ed said, have brought forward their expectations of the first RBA rate cuts from May to April next year. Now, the heart of the economic problem is households. They continue to go backwards. GDP per capita, in other words, the amount of economic output per person, it's fallen for 7 straight quarters now. Households are in recession. That's almost 2 years. And that's despite tax cuts, energy bill support from governments and wage increases as well. What happened is that families used much of that money to pay down their mortgages a bit more quickly. You can see that in a tick up to the household savings ratio. And where people did have spare cash, well, they travelled overseas. That was up 9.9% for the quarter alone. Well, someone who's explained all of this economic funk to you for some time now is Warren Hogan, economic advisor at the small business lender Judo Bank, who joins me now. Warren, these numbers are a surprise, surely, to the government. They're about to go to an election. The economy's in a funk, but it's the households that are feeling it. And you don't have to really tell anybody that households going backwards are unhappy households when it comes to politics.
Well, they are, and it was surprising how weak consumption was in the quarter. That was a big part of the miss. It's not great for the government in terms of trying to portray how the economy's going.
Government says no, wages are going up. Basically, we've got equality in wages coming. I heard the Treasurer this afternoon talking about this. They're trying to spin this somehow into being good news. It's not. It's bad news for Australia.
It doesn't paint a good picture of this economy, and there's a lot of complexity to it. The number one problem is we're a capacity-constrained economy. The governments of Australia are spending, and that's crowding out the private sector. The household sector is being held back by inflation, the squeeze on their disposable income. But the good news is there is signs of that improving in the quarter.
Treasurer says inflation's coming down. All is good. We're working hard to bring down the inflation rate. Is it the government? I thought the government was actually the cause of the inflation rate because of record government spending, according to the Bureau of Stats today.
We have record government spending. We've now surpassed, on the measures I used, the pandemic level highs. And we've seen government spending as a share of the economy shift up in the last decade by 25%, from about 22% to 28%. This is a radical shift in the structure of our economy, which, of course, in a world that's capacity constrained, puts pressure on inflation, but it also, it's the government competing with the private sector for staff, for tradies, for everything. And that's
because so many people now are reliant on government for their job.
There's a lot of that, and there's a lot of construction activity that's reliant on infrastructure projects and other government activities. So look, this is a very complex economy, and a lot of it comes down to this big surge in government spending. It's not sustainable, and that is an issue that has to be addressed. The investment side, I'm never going to argue with, because we need infrastructure. It's the recurrent spending that needs to be addressed.
We've seen this in all sorts of reports. The Deloitte report, the Chris Richardson report in the past week have all come out saying that basically government spending, state and federal, is pretty much out of control. It's got to be brought back in. Which politician, though, is brave enough politically to actually bring that spending back into check? You saw what happened to Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey when they tried to put a budget of restraint in many years ago. It just didn't work. So if it goes like this, the economy falls off a cliff at some stage.
Well, there's a couple of things that are worrying. One is the tax burden is getting unbelievably high, and that's going to effectively be a disincentive to work, to invest, the whole lot. At the moment, we've had a tax cut that we all know about, and it took the tax take for income tax down by 3.8% to $87 billion in the quarter.
OK, so just get this right. So the stage 3 tax cuts cost in that quarter $87 billion.
No. The total tax take was 87. The tax cuts only reduced it from just over 90 billion.
Right.
But back in the March quarter, not 6 months ago, the tax take was only 86.7 billion, i.e. despite the tax cuts, the government's income tax takes take from the households of Australia is higher than it was 6 months ago.
So that's inflation and bracket creep. So that again says that not only is government spending preventing interest rates from being cut because they're causing inflation, but then the second thing is that the government is taking even more out of households. So part of the squeeze on households that they're feeling the pressure right now is not just energy bills, not just supermarkets, not just all those places the government wants you to look, it's the government itself.
Oh, the real tax burden is rising, definitely. It's having just a bigger effect on households as higher interest rates, in my view. And of course, the other point here is that consumption was weak, but the evidence is starting to show that consumers did not respond to the tax cuts immediately in July and August. We saw better retail sales for October. We've seen some good anecdotes around Black Friday. I suspect the consumer is now starting to loosen the purse strings a bit heading into Christmas. We don't know for sure, but this soft consumer story, I think we should be careful to overstate it. I think we're seeing a recovery in household incomes, and we should see a recovery in consumption. But of course, that is into an economy that has got inflation and is operating at its capacity. This gives the RBA no room to cut rates.
I was going to say, where's the room to cut rates, as the markets are saying today?
There was a very big reaction in the bond market, the money markets, and I think it's the wrong reaction. The market is looking at two things. One, the weak headline GDP. That is not the right way to look at these numbers. And of course, the other dynamic here is the RBA legislation. The government can appoint board members in 1 March for that April meeting. And there's a view, rightly or wrongly, that they're going to appoint people who will want to cut rates before the election.
OK, so they cut rates before the election. The government gets what it wants. That all takes place. But then what does that do to the economy? Because that could actually create inflation. And then the Reserve Bank simply has to turn around and start raising rates in the future.
Well, it could, and that's why I don't think the RBA is going to do that, no matter who's on the board. And of course, I think we're going to start to see some better consumer spending numbers over the summer. And the case for a rate cut just won't be there. But the fact of the matter is we have a big issue in our society about the size of government. And of course, this inflation problem is a long way from being over.
OK, if you're the Prime Minister right now, given the economy, given everything you can see right now, would you prefer to go to the polls sooner or later? Are things going to be worse in 4 months' time or 3 months' time, or are they going to be as bad as they are now?
I don't think you're going to get a rate cut, but the economic data might be better.
Tell you what, Warren Hogan, good to have you in the program today.
Thanks, Ross.